Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I had a lot of people send me this story, including Jay Justin Wilson of the Institute for Justice, and that's who this story is from. Headline: Alaska pilot asks U.S. Supreme Court to stop state from taking his $95,000 airplane over a passenger's beer. And it's not like the passenger was sitting up front swilling the beer with him. That's not what's going on here. So there is a cert petition that's been filed that argues the Constitution requires that a punishment must fit a crime. So back in 2012, that's how long these things take. That day began like any other for the man in the story. He's a longtime Alaskan pilot. He was ferrying a passenger and her groceries from Fairbanks to the village of Beaver. Hidden in the passenger's luggage were 3 cases of beer, 2 Budweisers and a Bud Light, intended as a gift to her husband, who's a local postmaster. And I got to understand that that little pile of alcohol ran afoul of Beaver's 2004 vote to entirely prohibit alcohol within the borders of the municipality. So before he could take off, state troopers searched the plane and discovered the beer. He was charged with a misdemeanor and convicted. So again, we've heard of stories involving pilots who are drinking. That's not what's happening here. It wasn't even his beer. The state was not done, though. For the last 13 years, prosecutors have been also trying to get his plane forfeited, which, by the way, is a Cessna U-206D, worth about $95,000. This past April, the Alaska Supreme Court issued an eye-catching ruling. The court started from the premise that the pilot had only known about 1 six-pack of his passenger's beer, but even so, the court rejected his argument that forfeiting the plane violated the U.S. Constitution's excessive fines clause. And we've talked about this exact concept before in another case that the IJ handled involving the guy named Timms. Remember Timms? T-I-M-B-S, Timms. The B is silent. And in that case, a state had said he needs to forfeit his vehicle because of a transaction that they say he conducted with the vehicle. But what he was charged with crime-wise versus how much the vehicle was worth seemed grotesquely out of proportion to most people. And it actually was found that way by the U.S. Supreme Court. So this seems similar. So the end result here is that a $95,000 plane being forfeited for transporting 6 cans of Budweiser. And again, I know you're going to say, but Steve, there's more beer. No, the Supreme Court said that they found that there were 6 cans and that was enough. So the pilot has partnered with the Institute for Justice to file a petition for certiorari, asking the U.S. Supreme Court to hear his case and clarify the standard for what makes a fine excessive under the 8th Amendment. And certiorari is one of those words that's not that fun to say if you're in a hurry or if you're tired. So most people just say cert. The excessive fines clause of the Constitution was built for cases like this, says Sam Gedge, a senior attorney at the Institute for Justice. As government agencies increasingly exploit fines and forfeitures to pad their budgets, it's vital that the Supreme Court make clear that the excessive fines clause is a meaningful check on government overreach. The Alaska Supreme Court's ruling puts it at odds with other courts around the country, most notably Timms versus Indiana, case I mentioned a moment ago. The U.S. Supreme Court in 2019 held that the excessive fines clause applies not just to the federal government, but to states as well. Following that first round victory, the Indiana Supreme Court ruled that forfeiting the $40,000 Land Rover was unconstitutionally excessive. Now, by contrast, Alaska holds that forfeiting a $95,000 plane over a 6-pack of beer is not excessive. That disparity underscores the need for the U.S. Supreme Court to clarify the standard for these types of cases and what constitutes an excessive fine under the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution specifically says that excessive fines are not allowed. They are unconstitutional. So the pilot says, this case isn't just about me or my airplane anymore. I'm in my 80s now, and I've been fighting this for over a decade because I see it as my duty to ensure the Bill of Rights actually means something in protecting against government overreach. So this guy is saying, I'm doing this on principle. The Constitution enshrines the principle that punishment must fit the crime, says IG Attorney Mike Greenberg. The Eighth Amendment's protection against excessive fines is one of our most important safeguards for individual liberty. It's past time for the Supreme Court to clarify what makes a fine excessive. And here's the thing. Courts will sometimes rule and say, here's what we think. But they won't explain enough of their rationale to show like a rule or a formula or a method that people could predict whether a court will find it excessive. Now, I would think if they found the $40,000 Land Rover excessive in that context, the $95,000 plane over a six-pack of beer ought to really be excessive. You'd think, but the Alaska Supreme Court says no. Meanwhile, the Institute for Justice has fought and won landmark cases at the U.S. Supreme Court defending property rights and limiting government overreach and forfeiture powers. In addition to winning Timms versus Indiana at the Supreme Court and twice at the Indiana Supreme Court, IJ has litigated excessive fines and other fines and fees cases nationwide. This petition continues that fight. And it makes you wonder, how many of these cases must they fight and win to get some kind of ruling where the Supreme Court says, okay, from now on, this is wrong and here's how you can figure it out. That kind of a ruling is necessary. However, right now, it looks like this is what we call a righteous case. It's a good case to take up, and I'm rooting for them. So I'm going to mention, as I always do, the Institute for Justice is a nonprofit that exists entirely and operates entirely off of the generosity of its supporters. If you can support them financially, please do so. If you can't, follow them and support them with your moral support. Go to their website. It's ij.org. Go to their channel on YouTube. Watch their videos. Sign up for their newsletter. They got a beautiful, high-gloss, 4-color newsletter. Check that out. But they take on these battles that other people won't. And I've done other stories about people who've taken cases to the Supreme Court. In fact, one was from Alaska a few years ago. It was about how expensive it simply was for the guy to get his case there. It can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And as you can imagine, if you call up an attorney and go, hey, I want you to take a case for me, it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, but I can't pay you. That's what we call a non-starter quite often. But the IJ finds cases like this, not only handles them at the trial court level if necessary, appellate level, state Supreme Court, or U.S. Supreme Court. They don't care. They take them on. They do it. They do the necessary work. If these people didn't exist, this kind of good work probably wouldn't get done, at least not on the scale at which they do it. So I am a huge fan of the Institute for Justice. So again, they're taking this case, they're asking the Supreme Court to accept it. And so keep in mind that for the most part, you don't have a right to have the Supreme Court hear your case. You can't demand it. And so you have to petition them and say, please, hear my case. And if they accept it, that's when they grant the cert. If they accept it, then they'll say, okay, we'll hear this case. They get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of requests all the time. And I believe it's 2 to 3% of cases that they accept. And I believe that for every 3 cases, 2 of them are criminal. Now, this does talk about criminal law. So that's good in that respect. They take more criminal cases than civil cases. However, it's still a very small number. The odds are stacked against you even getting your case heard. But they've gotten a bunch of cases heard, and they've won a bunch of them too. So again, I'm rooting for them. I hope you are too. Justin Wilson wrote that for the Institute for Justice. They sent it to me, but a lot of people saw this. Thank you very much. Alaska pilot asks U.S. Supreme Court to stop state from taking his $95,000 airplane because of a passenger transporting beer. Questions or comments, put them below. Those. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Sorry I'm late. Traffic is exactly how it's been every day for the past 5 years, and I was not expecting that.